we are designed for adventure as believers, that we're not designed for safety, that actually the best stuff happens and the most profound discipleship and transformation and change in people's lives happens when we're in a challenging space.
Well, hello everybody, this is Simon Gilbo with Inspired, and I'm thrilled to have an old mate this week. His name's Andy Flannagan. Hi Andy.
Hi Simon, how are you?
Yeah, great stuff, mate. So Andy and I, we go back about 20-ish, maybe 25 years. And back then, Andy, you were a sort of rock star with Jesus Christ. Maybe that's picking you up a bit too much, I don't know.
Well, I think folk star might be more accurate, Simon, truth be told. Yeah.
And,
it's a bit too crusty.
And you're a medic, and you now are Christians in politics, and you did loads of campaigning, so there's loads of stuff we're going to cover. But yeah, let's get cracking straight into it. So Andy, obviously from your accent, you're not from England, you're from Northern Ireland, brought up in Portadown. Give us a bit of context to your story.
Oh, I love the homeland so much. I love just thinking about it, just even hearing you say the words Northern Ireland. Loved growing up there, and such a privilege to grow up with an amazing mum and dad who, you know, my dad ran the Sunday school at the church we attended, and my mum was a Sunday school teacher. And I used to notice that every Sunday after all the classes finished, there would often be my mum sat with her head bowed with one of the girls in her class, just, you know, with her head bowed. And I remember just saying to Mum, I must have only been like 6 or 7 at the time. I said, Mum, you know, what's going on? What's going on when you're doing that? And Mum would say, oh, that's one of the girls who's decided to ask Jesus into their heart and become a Christian. And I was like, oh, cool. Can I do that? And so I remember really specifically sitting in my bedroom with my mum praying that prayer, age 7, and you know, that was the start of an adventure that just hasn't stopped since then. Really, this kind of incredible sureness about that, but also kind of a wildness about the different places and directions that's led. You know, adventuring with this, you know, wild, wonderful man who is God called Jesus, you know. It's just, you know, been shocking at times, but wonderful. But yeah, that's when it genuinely started. And I remember having, you know, done the kind of typical thing of as a kid, you know, reading all the notes that you read, those devotional notes that you read every day. But I mean, there was another specific moment when I was away on a camp, and I remember singing a song like, "Seek ye the Lord, all ye people. Come to him while he is near." I don't know if you remember that oldie. And but I just this is like absolute epiphany, going like, this whole singing songs thing is so much more fun. It's so much better if like you're actually singing them to somebody. You know, I think I'd probably just grown up with people singing songs, and so it just something you did, and it just did this absolute epiphany of like, wow, there's like, I'm actually singing this song to somebody who's there, who's present, and like, it just came alive. And I think that's where the passion for the music stuff started, and the desire to sing and the desire to express. And because, you know, I was your typical, you know, teacher's pet at school, you know, doing like, you know, top achiever and all the academic stuff. And so it really was an amazing thing for me to discover this kind of, I guess, the more creative, emotional, passionate side of me that was just far beyond the thinking, that was just about relationship and experience as well as knowing some facts, because I was big into knowing lots of facts. I was a bit of a geek. So yeah, I think that's probably, those are the two moments that sort of stick out from the early days.
And so were they sort of twin tracks in competition with each other, the sort of the medical stuff and the music stuff?
Well, I never really thought that the musical stuff would play such a part. I always thought it would just be a bit of a hobby. And so I was doing the medical degree, not because, to be honest, I thought, you know, I'm really called to be a doctor, but because I love the science stuff. I seem to be good at it. And I thought, look, this would be a useful tool. I remember there was an OM ship came to berth in Belfast when I was just before I was filling out my UCAS forms. And
was that the doulos?
It probably was, yeah, it probably was in those days. And I remember really specifically standing up at the end of a meeting to say, I'm like, God, I'm giving you my whole life. You know, this is like, I'm surrendering everything to you. This is like all my ambitions, hopes, and plans. And so like, I remember genuinely thinking, right, that's the primary thing. That's given that is the primary thing. And this kind of, you know, whatever I put on my UCA form for whatever comes next in terms of career, that's secondary. And so
I just thought, well, it's probably the most useful degree. Medicine is probably the most useful degree I can do, given the models for mission that had been, I get, what had been modeled to me in our church back home was, that mission equaled, wonderful ladies who went to serve in Uganda in the middle of nowhere and teach people and work in mission hospitals and things like that. I guess that was the thing that I thought you did when you did mission, or you were a missionary. That was it. And so I thought, well, might as well become a doctor, because then usefully that'll be a useful tool if I go to Africa. And so I guess that was the heart with which I started the degree, and I did love it. I loved doing the medical stuff, really enjoyed it, fascinated by it. But during that time, I started doing some summer stuff with Tear Fund, and started learning really about the state of the world and about economics and why so much of the world was in poverty, and what was going on with climate and what was going on with water cycles, and just learning about some of the just appalling injustices in our world, and just getting actually really quite angry about them, and seeing how that God was angry about those injustices as well, and learning a bit more about Scripture and God's passion for justice and the right ordering of society. Yeah. Not just caring about the state of our hearts, but caring about the state of our systems and structures as well. And I started writing songs. It happened at a time where I was starting to write songs, and people started listening to those songs. And it got to the point in the fourth year of my medical degree that we were probably doing gigs maybe 2 or 3 nights a week, at whether it was pubs or festivals or churches or wherever. And it was getting to the point where sort of the medicine was getting fitted in and around the music rather than the other way around. But then I got to those sort of final 2 years of, final year medical student and early first year as a junior doctor, where you're kind of doing, 70 hours a week, that kind of crazy time. So I just kind of put the head down and just went down thinking, well, this is just, this is going to be an interesting hobby. But then there was a very specific moment that I was doing a team for Tear Fund at Greenbelt, the festival. And we'd spent that summer working in a hospital in the middle of the biggest slum in Cairo, in Mokattam, in the Coptic area of Cairo.
Yeah,
where all the rubbish of Cairo comes back to this area. 26,000 people, 26,000 pigs, and there's this amazing hospital built in the middle of the slum there, and we spent that summer of 1994 working in that hospital and encountering like pain like I'd never seen, and poverty like I'd never seen, and it smells like I'll never forget. And we came back, and I wrote some songs during that time and shared some stories at Greenbelt as part of that Tear Fund team. And we'd been doing lots of activities all week, but just when we were singing those songs, people stayed in the tent, people stayed and listened and seemed to connect.
Yeah.
And I got this like funny feeling. I was like, God, is this what I'm meant to be doing? Actually, is this what I'm meant to be doing? And for the first moment, while stood on that stage, I had this heretical thought that maybe, medicine wasn't going to be the thing,
Which was huge, isn't it? I mean, so do you look back and think that was a waste all that time?
No, I really don't. I loved it, and and still it comes in useful. Most weeks there's something comes in very useful, whether it's treating the family or treating friends or looking after people, or just what I learned from working in the hospital. The privilege of that, and learning so much about human nature, I think, as well. I don't regret it for a second. But that that Greenbelt, after having that experience, there was the Sunday morning communion service, but this word was banging through my head: risk. But that would be such a risk. But that would be such a risk. I had all this medical training. That'd be such a risk. What are my parents going to think? That would be such a risk. And then this word was banging through my head, and I'll never forget. 10,000 people sat on the grass. And right at the end of the service, this Scottish lady, whose voice I will never forget, she said, no, we're just going to leave a time of silence at the end. And so I just sat there, and this word risk was banging through my head. Risk, it'll be such a risk. And then she said, and we'll close together. She said, Lord God, help us to be a people who take risks for you. I was just like out of the blue. There was nothing to do with anything in the rest of the service. She just said that. And I was like, whoa. I sat there like, absolutely transfixed. 10,000 people walk off, and I'm sat there on the grass on my own going, oh my goodness, maybe this is real. Maybe I'm not meant to actually be a doctor. Maybe this music thing is going to be, a bigger part of it than I thought. And so that was a kind of a major moment for me. But even so, when it came to the point of an opportunity coming up to do some music stuff with Youth for Christ, as it turned out, I still needed a ridiculous set of divine coincidences and nudges
for that to happen. It was crazy. I mean, I don't know. Have we time for me to tell you that part of the story, Simon, as well?
So good. Go for it.
Well, it was like I'd taken myself off. I was like 3/4 of the way through that first medical year working as a doctor, and I'd taken myself off for a week of just retreating, just to read and pray and sort of seek and see, like, what's going on here. I was like running a bed and breakfast. I was there all week, but a couple of friends came up and stayed, and 3 separate people arrived during that week with the same advert that they'd ripped out of a magazine, which was to run a band for Youth for Christ. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That would really stretch me. But I remember the deadline, the closing date was the 22nd of April. And I remember, but what really freaked me out was that you had to record a demo, and I didn't really have any gear for recording a demo except one of those double tape decks, those like old ghetto blasters, and I felt very insecure about recording stuff and sending it, so I put it off, and in the end I let the closing date slide by. I let the 22nd of April slide by, and I just thought, no, I can't face that. And it was a couple of weeks later, I was sat in the doctor's room in our hospital, and I really felt this nudge. I felt this nudge, which must have been a nudge of God, to call Youth for Christ. So I called them up and I said, look, did you ever appoint anybody for that job? And they said, oh, actually, no, we got some more applications. And so we've extended the closing date. And actually, it's tomorrow. And I was like, oh, right, that's interesting. And I'm the sort of person who probably does better with a really tight deadline like that. So I quickly recorded something that night, sent it off, and sent off the forms. And I got a call back the next week from Youth for Christ, and this is we're now into May, and what you need to know is that we'd organised our holidays for that set of months on the rota ahead of time back in February. I knew I was coming to a thing in London called the Young Adult Gathering, which is organised by some Christian MPs and folks passionate about public square, and that was in June, and I knew it was a Thursday to a Sunday conference, so I knew I needed the Thursday and the Friday off work. So I went to William, the guy who organised our rota, and said, look, can I have the Thursday and Friday off in June? And he looked at me and he said, well, I think you should take a Wednesday off as well, because otherwise you might not get your last day taken. I said, no, I'd rather keep that in case I need it for a wedding or something. And he said, no, you should take it. And William Moore was the most mild-mannered man you could ever meet. He would never be directive like that in speech, but really direct. He said, no, I think you should take the Wednesday. And I went, oh, okay. So I went home, and the next day I booked a flight to London for the Tuesday, for Tuesday night, thinking, right, I'll just do some sightseeing on the Wednesday. Great. I'll, nosy around London on the Wednesday, and then I'll start the conference on the Thursday. But that's back in February. So fast forward now to this phone call from Youth for Christ, and they say, look, Andy, I know this is probably impossible with your schedule in the hospital, but we'd love to meet you next week for an interview. In England, if that's okay. And I said, that's hilarious. I've for the last 3 months, I've had a flight booked to be in England next week. And then this lovely lady, Judy Lloyd, said to me, she said, well, I sorry to be even more specific, but would actually, the only day we could interview you would be the Wednesday. Could you do the Wednesday?
Love
I
it.
was like, oh my goodness, this is now beyond a joke, really. And that lunchtime, it gets better. That lunchtime, I went down to the computer room at work. The computer room at work is very. It was the early days of the internet, so I did a search for Youth for Christ because I didn't really know much about them. And just one document came up. Can you imagine the days where only one result came up when you searched for something? Yeah. Well, that was how early it was. It was it was 97 actually, and it was their strategy document that they just put together. And so because it was a strategy document, it had that verse from Isaiah at the top, which said, this is the way, walk ye in it. So I took notes thinking, right, this will help me bluff my way in the interview. I took some notes, and then I went back up I was working on a cardiology ward at the time, and there was a phlebotomist called Caroline, one of the nurses who took the blood samples, and she was a Christian. And she came up to me after that lunchtime. She said, Andrew, funny thing happened. I was praying at lunchtime, and I think the Lord gave me a verse for you. Now, and I don't really know where it is, but it's that verse. This is the way, walk ye in it.
Oh, come on.
So I get emotional even talking about it now. So it's just the most incredible thing. So anyway, needless to say, I took the leap. It still didn't impress many people around me in the hospital, and it didn't impress my parents for a while.
I can imagine.
But I was utterly convinced by what had happened that it was the right thing to do.
Have your parents come around?
Oh my goodness, yeah, they're just amazing. They've become, the hugest supporters. Oh, it didn't take them long, but I mean, fair enough. And it wasn't their fault that they were shocked. It was my fault at being really bad at communicating while I was a student. When I was doing all that musical stuff, that when I was saying we were doing 2 or 3 nights a week, when I was calling home, I was filtering out that information to my parents. I was making sure I told them how well the studies were going and how the exams were going. So like to all my friends at uni, it felt like a natural progression, and they were like, "Oh wow, that's really cool." Where mum and dad were like, "What?" So it was my own fault for my poor level of communication with my parents, or my cowardly level of communication with my parents. Should I say?
Well, bless them. Essentially, I think of my parents. I'm the only son, and I got 3 gorgeous sisters, and my dad invested a huge amount in my education. We sometimes joke about him wanting one of us to take care of him in his old age and stuff, and yes. I could have been when I just sort of jumped ship to go off to Burundi for those 20 years, and clearly not going the money route. He could have been, as parents, they could have lent against doing that, but I bless them for their total endorsement and being behind us. It's so important, isn't it?
It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? And it's it's very different to be the one who, now that I'm a parent myself, I totally get that. Just that just this gut-wrenching love that you have for your children. And yes, when somebody's in the middle of a maelstrom like I was there, I can be totally convinced that that's the right move. But when you're one step removed from it, that's very hard. That's very hard to be convinced of. And so, gosh, the learning of the learning that it's been for me as a parent to trust, to be able to trust, and to kind of trust your children to God.
Yeah.
Even when they might be making decisions that you're not impressed by, or that you're having, that's real love. That's, I think some of what we call love is actually control, isn't it? Some of what we think is love is like, because I'm content with that because I'm controlling the variables enough for me to be content and secure. But like the real God love is the freedom giving love, isn't it? And that's the seriously sacrificial stuff where you release people to go and fail and succeed. That is, and to bring you glory and to sin. That's the real deal there.
Yeah. So I think you had just under a decade, didn't you, with Youth for Christ? Can you give us some highlights, lessons learned, or glory stories?
Oh wow, that was an incredible time. The joys of that time were just seeing kids become Christians, to be honest. We were that was in the era where we were doing the classic sort of we would arrive in a town for a week and we'd hit 3 or 4 of the schools doing assemblies, workshops, lunchtime concerts, all with the mission of doing educational stuff that was really good, but also inviting the kids in a town to a big gig that we would have organized for the end of the week. And during that gig we would share more and share testimonies, and I would unashamedly do a real preach at the end of those concerts, and regularly just saw 20, 30 kids becoming Christians on a Friday night, and then being followed up and becoming part of whatever youth work was going on in that given town. And to do that for a few years running, so you're then coming back to the same places and seeing how people have gone on with God, and seeing how it hasn't just been a kind of a hit and run thing, and how it hasn't just been kind of in the emotion and the energy, because we were like all singing, all dancing, choreography, lights, smoke machines, it was that sort of thing. And so all the sort of stuff that can easily be accused of just getting kids caught up in the moment and the energy and the peer pressure of it all, but actually seeing God do real stuff in the midst of that, sort of those creative expressions, was just beautiful. And and so some beautiful things of people then going on to like lead ministries and lead Christian unions, and having come from nowhere, from a standing start, and some really beautiful and painful stories as well. This guy who became a believer once we'd done a mission week there, but then finding out from talking to his youth worker a few months later at Spring Harvest that he died from a brain tumor just a month after we'd been there, that nobody knew was going on, but knowing that that visit that we'd made to him was just in time. I mean, but I think the thing that sticks out more than anything else is that period of time is what fully confirmed to me that we are designed for adventure as believers, that we're not designed for safety, that actually the best stuff happens, and the most profound discipleship
and transformation and change in people's lives happens when we're in a stretched space together. Some people call it a liminal space. Some people call it just a challenging space. But, I was leading these teams of 10, 18 to 25 year olds who were being stretched physically, who were being stretched musically, who were being stretched spiritually. And, the aggressive improvement and discipleship and transformation that happened in the lives of those young people in those teams, since that time, I've never seen it happen so fast in any context I've been in. I guess I've tried to recreate that context in many other places, but having this shared mission brings a bonding that is incredible. But having a shared challenge where there's sometimes danger involved, even when there's some sort of stuff that you've experienced in Burundi, there is nothing like a shared mission to actually, the discipleship is designed to happen on mission. It's the pattern of how Jesus released his disciples. We are designed to learn this stuff on the go, on the fly. We are not designed to just learn it all in some seminary and then go out and do it, or we just learn stuff on a Sunday and then go out and do it. We are designed to be learning in the midst of the adventure, and the most profound change and the most beautiful things, and some really awkward characters who were really spiky teenagers with real attitude problems and real, what you would call really challenging, potentially, fatal flaws character wise, seeing those things turned around by the love of a tight community and the power of a God who is coming through for people because they're sticking their necks out for him, and they're in that challenging space, and they're being stretched, and they're being asked to speak in front of 200 kids when they're so nervous and they're totally insecure about this issue that they've got, So I guess that is the thing that's informed more than anything else the rest of how I've gone about my life, and the things I've been involved in is this, making sure that we are, rather than trying to do discipleship in a lab, in a vacuum, that it's happening, that we find adventures. And sometimes it doesn't even matter what the adventure is, but we just have to find adventures to do together where we're going to be stretched and where we're going to need each other, and where we're going to need God. And that's where we learn.
Hey folks, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I'm loving the response we're getting from across the world. It's just wonderful to see how encouraging and inspiring it is being and hitting the spot. Listen, if you are being blessed by it, I'd love it. Basically, this happens under the auspices of our ministry, Great Lakes Outreach, which works in the poorest and the hungriest country in the world, which is Burundi. We're having an incredible impact in the toughest of circumstances. We want to carry on supporting those local folks doing a great job. So if you wanted to, greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. You could make a donation there. I'd so appreciate it. Also, it's word of mouth, isn't it? So gossip these podcasts to other people, get them to subscribe, give us a great review. Absolutely wonderful. So grateful to you. So that's greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. If you want to do a monthly, a couple of quid a month, or a one-off donation, we'd be incredibly grateful. All right, now let's get back to the podcast. Andy, I wanted to ask about the campaigning stuff, because I'm guessing your sort of mini rock star status meant that groups, I'm flattering you, buddy. Groups wanted to use you, I suppose, to leverage interest in the younger generation. I suppose even me running Glow right now, I mean, you're too old for me, but if I can get some mid-20s, sort of, I don't know, some of the message guys
absolutely
involved, get them out.
You want some influencers, basically, Simon, don't you? You want some influencers.
That's right.
I am not that person.
But anyway, you mentioned earlier about getting angry, and I similarly, when you see injustice, you get angry, you want to do something about it. In fact, we did this really powerful film called Screaming Injustice. It's on YouTube, and I start with a line, I think God wants us to get angry. And, anger, of course, can be a sin, or rather the manifestation, the outworking of anger. If you see someone, you go and smack them in the face. That's not the best outworking of anger, but anger actually can be the heartbeat of God, can't it? When you see, for example, Jesus, when he saw the misuse of his father's house, he got angry. And the Bible doesn't say, don't be angry. It says, be angry and don't sin in Ephesians, isn't it? Or in your anger, don't sin. You started traveling around the world and highlighting things that the body of Christ should get angry about, being God's redemptive agents for change and transformation. Go on, just give us some of those stories.
Well, it was such a privilege. I mean, I guess it was such a privilege because my knowledge of the presence of these injustices was through working with people like Tear Fund when I was much younger. And then so it was a privilege to, for example, be, you know, taken by Tear Fund to Bangladesh to visit sweatshops, for want of a better word, all the garment factories, you know, like over 5,000 garment factories in Dhaka, in the capital city alone, to see the conditions that these many young people, sometimes young girls, young boys were being asked to work in, and see the living conditions that people were being cramped in. You know, some places where, you know, some of the only places in the world where leprosy is still an issue because of how cramped the living conditions are. You know, and seeing, you know, actually being in factories in Dhaka and seeing labels being stitched on to jeans that said "Made in Germany" or "Made in the UK," you know, being stitched on in a Dhaka factory, and you're just realizing that these jeans are going to Primark, these jeans are going to, you know, British high street stores, and so there's a big campaign that Tear Fund was part of called the Ethical Trading Initiative that we were highlighting off the back of that, and it became a big campaign, and we wrote songs and we toured around and told people about it, and that was an incredible privilege to be part of that, and then just to meet incredible people whose lives were, you know, from a logistical point of view, so much more complicated and so much more difficult than mine, but to see, you know, it's the cliche thing we always say, but whose joy levels and whose faith levels were so much higher than mine, and for that to be such an inspiration. And I, you know, whether it was then, you know, orphanages in Uganda or some challenges with, you know, Christians being persecuted in Egypt or wherever the trip was, this privilege of being able to get these snapshots into other worlds, but then try and, you know, I love trying to rise to the challenge of authentically then represent those people, you know, through song and through story in a way that would inspire Christians in the UK and in America and in Europe sometimes, you know, to be to be actively involved and to be aware that, yes, God's angry about this stuff and therefore we should be angry about this stuff and we should not be silent. And so that was in an era where folks like Tear Fund and Christian Aid and Oxfam were realizing that, as well as fundraising for deprived parts of the world, that they actually needed to be involved in changing legislation. Otherwise, those parts of the world would stay deprived, you know, whether it's about trade rules or whether it's about debt. In that era, you know, everybody, you know, the Make Poverty History marches, the Jubilee debt campaigns, you know, just before the turn of the millennium, you know, and so therefore a lot of them, where their campaigning was being focused on power brokers and on politicians. And so I was being asked to sing to and speak to politicians and those people who move in those sort of circles. And that was a real aha moment for me, really. There was that was my kind of, maybe my second major epiphany really in life, that I met so many of these politicians and went, oh my goodness, there is no magic dust here. There is no. These are not a group of people who are operating on a higher spiritual, moral, intellectual plane than the rest of us. You know, these are very normal people. So I guess number one, compassion for their humanity and the challenges that they face. But number two, realizing that there really is no magic dust here. That actually, some of the leaders that I'd met in and around the church and around NGOs were far more impressive and strategic thinkers and leaders and have much more spine and integrity than a lot of the people I was meeting in and around Parliament. And I was going, my goodness, there's such a need for us as believers to not just be doing what we had been doing really effectively, the kind of shouting from the outside, the, you know, the being on the march to make poverty history, the sending all the emails about debt rules, you know, the writing, the mass letter writing campaigns, you know, that shouting from the outside stuff, saying that actually there was a huge need for people of goodwill and for believers to be actually on the inside in the systems and structures, working in the civil service, working in politics, or being candidates themselves, being involved in the research, being involved in the policy deliberations, and you know, God began to open doors to serve into that world and to help with the prayer stuff that was happening in Parliament, to help with the Bible study and worship stuff that was happening in Parliament, and gradually through that and doing some writing, ended up being involved.
So I just wanted to ask about like the campaigning and just a straight question, you know, does campaigning work?
Absolutely. It's so important. I think,
because most people don't. Most people can't be bothered. All that it takes for evil to prosper is for good people to do nothing. That's Edmund Burke, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Famous quote. But does it really work?
I think
you only need to look at the changes in our society, the cultural changes in our society over the course of the last 3-4 decades to see that campaigning absolutely does work. There have been huge societal shifts, huge cultural shifts, and that's happened because people have been speaking up and making their voice heard. Now, I think it's really important, especially for Christians, to speak up. Yeah. But we have this very interesting distinctive. We are not meant to be just another minority group speaking up for our rights, because that's quite often what we can become as Christians, with that really shrill defensive tone. Mm-hmm. We have this incredible distinctive that we are called to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Yeah. We're called not to speak up and say, hey, our rights are being oppressed. Oh, hey, we're being quashed down here. Oh, hey, we're not being allowed to speak. Oh, hey, we're not allowed to do this. We can't do this, that, or that. We're not there. Yes, we should raise our voices, but we're called to raise our voices on behalf of others. Mm-hmm. Which is a really interesting distinctive, and it should really change how we speak. And our tone in public debate and campaigning also should be influenced by what we know to be true about the future. Mm-hmm. Coming from Northern Ireland, I know the tone that Christians use in the public square all too well sometimes, because it's the tone of my people, the Northern Irish Protestants, whose tone often in public is the shrill tone of people who are going, oh no, the Catholics are going to outbreed us. Mm-hmm. We're becoming the minority here, and it's that siege mentality. It's that like we're going down. If we are people of God, we believe that we know the end of the story. Yeah. We believe that we know where this story is going, and that we don't know exactly how that all happens at the end of all things, but we believe in the restoration, redemption, and reconciliation of all things to their Creator. Amen. Who will set all things right. So we know the end of that story, and that should change, I guess, sometimes the angst with which we communicate things, that absolutely we can be angry at injustice, but we can do it in a way that has a tone and has an actual connection to relationship. That means that we care about the big picture, that we care not just about getting our policies through, but we care about the people that we're interacting with. We want those people to get to know Jesus as well. Yeah. We want people. Yeah. This is not just about getting the right policies. This is about people coming to know Jesus. And so all the Christians who have the privilege of encouraging and challenging and leading, that are getting involved in politics, we're constantly saying it's both and. Yeah. It's the policy stuff, and we are there because this politics happens to be our mission field. In the same way that for somebody else it's education, for somebody else it's being an estate agent, for somebody, that happens to be our mission field. So we want people to smell Jesus off us as well. Yeah. So sometimes we can get so caught up in the issues, and we can actually make idols of issues as well. You look at what's happened in and around Brexit, or in and around some of our present debates, and you realize that people have started to grab too tightly to an issue in a way that makes their communication on that issue that kind of nasty, ugly, visceral thing. And it's called, the Bible has a word for it. It's idolatry. We things that come before Him. And you can see that with the Brexit debate, that those sort of things have started to become our primary identity, rather than our identity being found in Christ. And so yes, we need to be campaigning, but we also need to be really thoughtful about how we're campaigning, and about what are some of the side effects of the campaigning that we do, to make sure that we are only doing what He calls us to. Doing that Jesus thing. We are so lazy. I am so lazy. We just want our instructions and we want to get on with it. Rather than doing the Jesus thing of like only doing what we see the Father doing, or only in any given moment. So some days that might mean shutting up, and some days that might mean being very loud. Some days that might mean turning over the tables in the temple. Some days it might mean just being the gentle Jesus, making mild, listening and embracing and welcoming all. There's no hard and fast. We need to be in contact. We need to be in this intimate relationship with our Father, which means we are actually doing what He calls us to on any given day, rather than just being these pre-programmed robots with a strategy. And so I think when we're campaigning, we need to bear that in mind.
Yeah. I obviously fed you that question. I totally believe in campaigning, and a number of years ago, I wanted to sort of show that to the youth at New Wine. So you had the 12 and 13, you had the 14 to 18. So it was probably 1,500, 2,000 youth there. And I said, listen, guys, we're going to do this campaign. I teamed up with Open Doors, and we're going to campaign on this. And all of us sign this piece of paper. We're going to send it in. But by this time next year, I'll be able to come back and feedback that law has been changed on the basis of you campaigning. Or the next year, it was this guy that was persecuted and was imprisoned. And he shouldn't have been. And it was lovely to go back next year.
Brilliant.
And look, we've done it, guys. So,
brilliant.
So everyone listening, please, apathy is so common, and campaigning does work. But you put the nuance there that comes with listening well, and listening both to what people are saying and not having a shrill voice, and speaking the truth in love, and just partnering with the Holy Spirit in terms of what He's doing. Yeah. So obviously I can see the threads of your life being woven together as God uses these different experiences, be it the music, be it the medicine, be it the campaigning, and now all coming into Christians in politics. So that's your current chapter. It's been the last, 10 years? Tell us how that has really sort of been lived out.
Well, it's just, again, really stumbled into it, to be honest. I was doing that stuff at Parliament, as I said, with the worship and the Bible study and the prayer, and then got invited to be involved specifically in those days within the Labour Party, helping to write stuff, helping to help people process what it was to be a Christian, where theology and policy connect, and how there's so much of what is in Scripture, whether it's Jubilee or Sabbath, or the ordering of the New Testament church, that actually really has a lot to say about how we order society, and therefore how we approach policy as Christians, and what way we believe society should be ordered. And there's a rich time of investigating that and doing that with so many other folks. But in the midst of doing that, and then making the case for Christians to be involved, became really painfully aware that actually, before you could even get to discussing theology and policy and those sort of campaigning issues, that actually there was this kind of blind spot to politics in the church, that actually most Christians thought, no, politics is for other people. Right. It's a dirty business, and we shouldn't get involved. Realizing that actually that for decades Christians have sort of delegated, outsourced leadership to other people, rather than believing that I guess some unhelpful strains of theology have probably wafted over our way from the other side of the Atlantic, that says that politics is just a necessary evil to constrain evil. That because we live in a fallen world, we need politics. But otherwise, it's not a nice thing. It's just a necessary thing. And I think, but that flies in the face of Genesis chapter 1, where Adam and Eve are explicitly called into public leadership, are called into responsibility over all of creation, and made in His image. Not only given a job to do, but it's made clear that what they're doing in doing that job is actually imaging their Creator. Made in His image, because He governs, they are called into governance. That's actually expressing the image. That's being those priests that we're called to be. And thankfully, in recent times, so many people have woken up to those verses, because we've become aware of our need to look after our planet and environmental concerns and things. And so therefore that responsibility over all of creation has come into focus. But what we often forget about those verses, because of that focus, is the when of those verses, like when they take place, that actually Adam and Eve are called into that public leadership before the fall. The fall hasn't actually happened at that point. Sin has not entered. This is before any dysfunction. So it's not just kind of sorting out the problems of the world because it's fallen in a pragmatic way. This is actually a holy calling. This is a divine vocation. This is something that we're called into public leadership. If it's not us leading, then who will it be? We are called to lead in the public realm, in the cosmic realm, you'd almost say, thinking about the whole of creation. And it's not just this thing where it's a necessary evil to constrain evil. It is this divine holy calling. And so this realization that actually that's not where a lot of the church was meant, gosh, this is a story that needs told. And so we developed Christians in Politics as I guess as a storytelling mechanism, and discovering this I was involved in the Labour Party with my dear friend Elizabeth Berridge, who's now in the Lords, who led the Conservative Christian Fellowship. We formed a deep friendship and started praying together, and we started inviting each other. When we were invited to go and speak at a church or a conference or festival, we would invite the other one to go along, so that we would be standing in unity on those stages, and people's jaws were on the floor. We were surprised at how surprised people were that somebody from the Labour Party and somebody from the Conservative Party could be standing together. And saying, look, for us it's kingdom before tribe. You know, our
Yes.
primary allegiance is to a
Amen.
higher king, and trying to say, look, it is possible to disagree well in this inflammatory, toxic landscape. It is actually possible to disagree well if you put a priority on relationship, and if your primary allegiance is to a higher king, then it absolutely is possible. But it was just jaw-dropping to me how jaw-dropping that was to people in the church and around conference. And we thought, gosh, we need to actually make this a thing. We need to we need to establish this narrative, and that's how the Christians in Politics thing was really birthed. That actually it became an umbrella whereby Christians from all parties and none could come together, could share, learn from one another, could challenge one another, disagree well, but also take that message to the church, that sort of sending message. I guess it goes back to, what I thought a major part of my calling was. I back when I was still a medical student, I was getting really confused about, as I said earlier, my medical degree was going to be about going off to Uganda or Tanzania. And then George Verwer, he stood up at a meeting in Belfast and he said, in the study of missiology today, the major need is not for more missionaries. He said the bigger need is for people who I call senders, people who have a heart for a way, for something that's outside their own cultural context, but who have a gift in communicating at home. And it was just this thing just landed in me. It was like, oh my goodness. I remember shaking my friend Kate at the end of the meetings going, I think that's me. I think that's me. I think I'm meant to be a sender. I think that's what I'm meant to be, and around the same time, people were having prophetic words for me about being like, seeing me as a minstrel or like a Robin Hood type character playing a lute. And it was this sense of a minstrel of like a Pied Piper, almost like playing to people, but then leading them out into the harvest field. And that really rang true with all that work that I did with Tearfund over those years of calling people to this adventure, calling people to this more difficult place, to this less comfortable place. And I guess now it's, with the political work, it's just the mission field has become slightly more specific, but I'm really trying to send people and call people to this very specific mission field of politics.
Just wonderful, man. I could listen to you for a lot longer than we've got. It's interesting. I've never spoken at the Labour Christian Party group. I was just thinking back. I did speak at the Christian one. The Conservative one.
Yes.
And we were in Parliament, and it was down in the crypt somewhere.
Yes.
And I was welcoming people in. I don't know if you know Sheena Trent.
Yes, certainly, yes.
Right. And I was walking in, and she was the only one who had the courage. As I was shaking everyone's hand to say, Simon, you've got this massive bogey hanging out of your nostril. It was classic. Oh dear, maybe that's why I'm not being invited back. Anyway, mate, I love it. It's so kingdom. It's capital K. It's not small k. It's, that we need to be the church, capital C, not small c. We need to be bipartisan. It's Christians from all sort of different flavors, isn't it? And I think that challenge just rings loud and clear. What I love also in you, which we have hardly got time for, is that you're obviously embodying this as a family and at home, and your lifestyle choices, and as having trained as a doctor, you could have had such a different life, but you've chosen to live in the. I don't want people from Luton bringing out and complaining, but you've chosen to live in a rougher part of town, haven't you? And there comes a cost in that. Do you want to close and sharing what that looks like for you as family and incarnating kingdom values?
Gosh, it shouldn't allow it to be sounding much like anything too heroic, but I guess we really do believe in getting stuck in to normal communities, what I would describe as normal communities, when we lived 7 years in our council estate in London, which is where Jen and I chose to live after we got married, in South London, and just the learning that we experienced there, I genuinely believe that one of the biggest challenges in our society, and especially for the church, is that we are incredibly segregated, and I desperately believe in the importance of integration. You see it with the Brexit thing as well, that actually mostly working class people will exist with working class people, and middle class people will exist with middle class people, and never the twain shall meet. And there are so many societal, housing, educational factors that make that worse and are making it worse as we speak. But there is so much learning to be had from living amongst people who are not like you. There is so much learning to be had. And we were so humbled and learned so much living on our estate in London. We just cherished it. It was an amazing time setting up a tenants and residents association and trying to bring some community and life and hope and prayer into that space. A big, huge block of, like thousands of people blocks, living on it in Doddington Grove in South London. And it was an absolute joy, but it wasn't just about what we were able to bring some energy and enthusiasm, but it was also about what we learned from the beautiful people that we shared life with. That to be honest, lessons we wouldn't have learned and life experiences we wouldn't have had if we'd stayed in sort of the sort of the nicer parts of town. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I do think it won't be everyone's calling, but I think it should be the calling for many more of us than probably that it is at the moment, because I think we are designed to need each other in that way. The way that we were able to help people without really even doing very much, just because of the resources and contracts and just the relational resource that you can bring to a community, just because of who you are and who you have connection with and how you're able to help and how you're able to encourage people to help themselves. It's such an incredible privilege, and we shouldn't overblow it. It's just it's just where we lived, But it was something very precious and something very special. And Jen and I learned an awful lot. We were really inspired by incredible pioneers like Ash Barker, our friend Ash, who, for 12 years lived in like the worst slum in Bangkok with his family. And and people like yourself, and doing what you did in Burundi, where people, would be then asking us, well, are you sure you really want to be living there? Because, is it not, should you not, you're kind of imposing your values on your children there. Should you not just be letting them make their own, just giving them the best start possible and then let them make those decisions for themselves. And at that point, you're kind of coming head to head with this cultural value of, well, what do you mean by the best life possible? What do you mean by giving our kids the best start possible? Do you mean having them in a comfortable place where they've got their PS3 and they're just playing on a screen all day? Or do you mean being in a place where they're seeing miracles and they're seeing the pain and the actual reality of life for people, like, the stuff that Ash's kids saw in that slum in Clongtoy, seeing people healed miraculously, seeing, social enterprises begin that take people off the streets from being sex workers to being, giving, making a valuable contribution to their own community, seeing the transformation that's possible, but seeing the ugliness of life as well, is that, and seeing Jesus at work. Is that not the best start possible? Do you know what I mean? Absolutely. It's just like, what are we trying to, and yes, obviously I know I want to insulate my kids. It is my job to insulate my kids from some things and not just expose them to absolute the wildness of the world in fullness. But I do think that kind of a lot of the adventure of life is curtailed because when we get to that point of being parents, we kind of we start playing it safe a bit more, and so people like Ash and yourself and had really inspired us along those lines. Our friend Bob Ekblad over in the States as well, and the stuff he was doing with offenders, just inspiring us to actually, that's not just that, oh yes, we can change the world. It's not this kind of messianic thing. It's actually, that's where the life is. That's where the learning is. That's where we're going to be changed. That's where we're going to be transformed. That's where we're going to need our God. That's where we'll experience what the first disciples experienced of going, help, we don't know how to do this, but God, we need you. And that's, if there was one way to summarize it, it'd be from my experience of all that work with Tear Fund and seeing different things around the world, it's that quite often you'll come across places where there are absolutely tragic, awful things happening. But in those same places, it's probably no accident that you will also see these amazing, miraculous things happening.
Yeah.
And I think so often we want to avoid the tragic that we also exclude ourselves from seeing the miraculous. And I think, that for me, that's just, I want to be in that mess. I want to be in the mess because, selfishly, I want to see God do miraculous things and I want to see that. But, we end up just doing our kind of the safe version of it. I call like falling over in the suburbs, kind of, and it's not surprising that we're not seeing God move in the supernatural way that we'd like to see him move because maybe we're just not in step with where he is.
Yeah. Dude, I'm going to stop you. You are so hard to interrupt.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry.
You're coming out with such gems. So anyway, listen, time has run out. We might have to get you back again, but it's been such a pleasure. Give 30 seconds, anything you want to sort of push people towards checking out. Go for it.
So this autumn, Christians in Politics are launching the Influence course, which is a bit like, like an alpha course, 6-week course for small groups in churches to do that actually encourages people, gives them some theological backbone, some activities, some fun little bits of homework to actually encourage people into public leadership, to encourage people to be involved in their communities and be involved politically. But that's very much with a small p. There's a place for everybody. And it's not just a course for the political geeks to do, it's a course for everybody in a church to do. So that's wonderful. Starting in the autumn, and you can get the resources from www.christiansinpolitics.org.uk.
Brilliant. Okay. And we'll put any other stuff in the blurb. You send that to me. Andy, what a pleasure. Thanks so much, bro. Listen, everybody, next week we'll have another superb guest. I hope you've loved it. We've quit wanting more. I certainly have. And if you've loved it, please give us a top quality rating on iTunes or wherever else you watch this. And please gossip this around. The more that hear that, I mean, it's just so edifying. It's inspiring. I'm putting down the you know, stopping the call now, inspired. I hope you are too. So let's just spread the word. All right, Andy, God bless you, mate.
Oh, bless you, Simon. Lovely to speak to you.
All right, everybody, toodaloo.